Hi, this is Dr. Mick Hall. I'd like to begin by letting you know that my intention for this CD is dedicated to you and the millions of people that I care about, whether I know them or not. As Americans, for over 60 years, we've enjoyed the comfort of feeling secure within our homeland. We've been able to sleep at night feeling confident that we're safe and that we won't be waking to a hostile enemy within our borders. Sadly enough, an enemy as dangerous as an invading army is now threatening this long period of freedom. What I'm about to present may sound alarming and a little bit extreme, but I've been fully aware of the advancement of this threat for 35 years, and because I know for certain that the threat is real. If I didn't warn you about it, I would be partially responsible for your not being prepared as you could be to defend your health and your well-being. What I'm talking about is not only the threat of mandatory swine flu vaccinations, but also the agendas of those who are really behind the drive for mandatory vaccines and government-controlled health care. One thing that I want to confirm for you is that the swine flu of itself isn't a serious threat to most of us, but the vaccinations and the hidden agendas definitely could be. The reason I feel obligated to address this issue with you is because of the obviously suspicious drive behind the compulsory vaccinations and supposed healthcare issues. And what's so suspicious is that the doctors, nurses, and medical scientists, these are the people who are really in the know, feel no special threat from the actual swine flu, but the drive for compulsory vaccinations and health insurance is actually being mandated from Washington, D.C. Do our politicians somehow have greater insights into our health needs than our healthcare professionals? Or maybe they just care so much about us they don't want for us to get sick, maybe. Obviously, to believe either possibility would require for us to overlook the many self-serving decisions made in Washington over the past year. No matter what the reason might be for the push toward mandatory swine flu vaccinations, we can be totally confident of one certainty, that it won't be for our benefit. Within a very short period of time, each and every one of us will be faced with a very serious decision. If it becomes mandatory to receive a swine flu vaccination, will you give your consent? And if you have children at home, will you give your consent for your children to be vaccinated? Just as a hint, since doctors and nurses continually observe the benefits and detriments of medications such as swine flu shots, maybe we should consider what they actually do for themselves, since they obviously have this knowledge. Well, according to the Journal of Internal Medicine, 70%, that's 70% of all doctors and nurses do not get annual flu shots. Do you think they actually know something that isn't being shared with the rest of us, such as the great health risks compared to the slight chance of a benefit? As with any important decision we're faced with, it's impossible to make a wise decision without sufficient reliable information. As a researcher, I've always done my best to only share with others what I wholeheartedly believe to be the truth. Because of specific information that was shared with me early in the 70s, I honestly believe that what I'm sharing with you now is the absolute truth. Over the next few weeks, we'll all be bombarded with the greatest barrage of fear-based lies the media has ever poured out to us. We'll be told of the great dangers of the upcoming swine flu pandemic, and probably how anyone who doesn't get vaccinated will be endangering those who have already received their vaccinations. As the next few weeks go by, the news reporters and the human interest programs being aired by the major networks will gradually intensify their chanting of the reasons everyone must get a swine flu shot. Rather than exposing yourself to the brainwashing programs the pharmaceutical companies have already paid for and are preparing to launch, I'd like to encourage you and everyone you associate with to learn the truth about the swine flu scam and the serious health threats the vaccinations themselves possess. And question for yourself why any group of individuals would want to threaten the well-being of most people on Earth by claiming an international swine flu pandemic. Okay, let's first of all consider the actual threat of the swine flu. Although the Center for Disease Control and Prevention claims that 36,000 Americans die every year from the flu, others have concluded from evaluating statistics from 2004 and 2005 that a more accurate average is actually around 1,500, which is about 25 times less than the CDC's exaggerated number. Now, if the number of deaths were actually 36,000 per year, it would be much easier for a person to picture him or herself among that number. But the truth is, the only realistic way a person can die from a flu is if there is a serious pre-existing condition that would place them into a high-risk group of danger. In fact, more people die from asthma and malnutrition in the U.S. than from flu. I know we all feel lousy with a flu, but generally the worst part of the flu is that it brings about a good old-fashioned body cleanse. Remember, when it comes to the flu, the virus is basically nothing more than a triggering mechanism, and a trigger is harmless. It's the bullet that harms or kills, and with the flu, the bullet is the rapid release of mucus, chemicals, toxic metals, and the volumes of stored body waste being dumped from tissue storage. It isn't volumes of virus multiplying themselves and oozing from the body. A fairly strong and healthy person will go down for a few days with the flu, but bounce right back. A weak and less healthy person will have the flu for a longer period of time, but still reverse it just fine. But a person who is in an already weakened state from a pre-existing diseased condition may truly have their life threatened. But the truth I want you to hold on to is this: a truly healthy person has absolutely no reason to fear swine flu or any other flu. Now, while that statement is an absolute truth, there is one problem I need to point out regarding the healthy people of our country. That is that 99% aren't really quite as healthy as they might think they are. So chances are you might have a good chance of falling into this category. So we need to come back to this subject in a few minutes to review some necessary solutions. But in the meantime, I'd like to expose some of the lies we'll soon be hearing. First of all, it will be implied that the swine flu vaccination is the best protection from swine flu. This is the biggest lie of all. Just because the pharmaceutical companies have enough money to manipulate our politicians and the media doesn't mean that their so-called solution is of any value. There have been several recent master studies that have analyzed all relevant influenza vaccine studies during the past 40 years and have found flu vaccines to be ineffective in children under 2 years of age, in healthy adults under 65 years of age, and in people aged 65 years and older. In addition, there was little evidence that flu vaccinations were beneficial when administered to healthcare workers to protect their patients, or when given to children to minimize transmission of the virus to family contacts, or when given to vulnerable people, such as those with asthma or cystic fibrosis. In other words, flu vaccines are ineffective for all humans. In fact, in October of 2006, the British Medical Journal published a paper that analyzed all pertinent vaccination studies and found that flu vaccines had little or no effect on influenza campaign objectives, such as hospital stay, time off work, or death from influenza and its complications. Now, it really doesn't matter what sort of product is being evaluated. When a close study is made of 40 years of a product's performance, and the conclusion is that it hasn't produced any positive benefit, why would anyone continue buying such a product? The only reason a person would ever be foolish enough to add their money to the billions of dollars being piled up for the sale of a worthless product would be if you were being lied to about its effectiveness, and if you were being falsely led to believe that your life could be in danger if you didn't purchase the product. I don't know how that makes you feel, but I don't think it should be legal for any company to conduct business in such a deceitful way. Well, the fact that the product we're discussing, flu vaccinations, have been proven to be of no human benefit should be cause enough for everyone to refuse to purchase the product. But there are much more serious reasons to not only refuse the purchase of this product, but reasons why the product needs to be made illegal to produce or to sell. If a company is driven only by greed and has absolutely no regard to human life, the quickest way to amass billions of dollars is to create a serious health threat, then offer a solution that also contains the seed for the next problem for which the company can provide another similar solution. The current example of this scam is called the swine flu pandemic. Dr. John Carlos exposed a very vital piece of this scam when he stated, "The swine flu virus has been cultured in a laboratory and has never before been seen in the U.S. or the world. This new viral strain is presently under investigation." So from Dr. Carlos' statement, we see where the virus came from and how it's now being medically introduced into humans around the world. Our next concern needs to be, how dangerous is this man-made virus in comparison to a normal flu virus? According to a recent posting on the website of the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, posted this morning, October 1st, 2009, they say the swine flu virus was first detected in people in the U.S. in April of 2009. Now, with the CDC being the government's watchdog for disease, it's surprising for them to make such a statement when there was a report from Washington, D.C. on May 8th regarding 18 sailors with swine flu. Another statement made by the CDC in this update was that, so far most flu being reported is the 2009 H1N1 flu, commonly called swine flu. I would imagine that the reason they made that claim is because it really isn't even flu season yet. But however the sailors contracted swine flu out of season must be the reason others are getting swine flu before flu season even begins. And finally, the most interesting statement from this key organization that pushes vaccines, they state most people who have become ill with this new virus have recovered without requiring medical treatment. True swine flu is a virus-induced respiratory illness in pigs. Very few ever get this flu and die from it, and humans are rarely infected, except occasionally among people having direct contact with infected animals. For most who do, symptoms are generally mild. Medications and other treatments are not essential. The illness usually lasts from 2 to 7 days, and most patients recover on their own. For more clarity, according to a Sydney, Australia-based immunization specialist, Robert Bowie, the swine flu virus, now we're talking about the laboratory-designed virus Dr. Carlos informed us of, seems to be affecting about twice as many people in a fatal manner. In other words, rather than the normal 1,500 deaths from flu, there may be as many as 3,000 people killed in the U.S. as a result of this new strain of virus being created and released. Now, 3,000 people sounds like an alarming number. Keep in mind it is far lower than the exaggerated CDC number of 36,000. Also remember that there are approximately 307,590,000 people in the U.S. That means that only one person in about 102,530 may be affected at most from the so-called swine flu season. Yet we're being led to believe that we are all in danger of being killed by the flu. Now let me share another fact with you that may calm your concerns about the possible threat of dying from the flu. Lucian Leape, a Harvard University professor, conducted the most comprehensive study of medical errors in the U.S. He estimated that 1 million patients are injured by mistakes being made while treated by U.S. hospitals every year, and that 120,000 of these injured patients die as a result of these mistakes. Now that's like having one jumbo jet holding 330 people crashing every single day. And because the news media doesn't say there's anything wrong with this, 120,000 people continue to die every year and are considered as justifiable collateral damage. The main reason that I'm pointing out the fate of these 120,000 people is when the government starts warning us that it will soon be mandatory for each one of us to purchase a product that has already been proven useless, and we're told that every one of us must buy this product or be fined or imprisoned, and the reason we must purchase this product is so that we can all together save the lives of maybe 3,000 of us. Something is just a whole lot more than fishy here. It's interesting how the government ignores the death of these 120,000 people every year, but all of a sudden they want to go all out to supposedly save as many as possible of these 3,000. Now, simple and out-of-control greed may be one reason to manipulate and bribe politicians and the media to force all of us to purchase a useless product, but we need to consider the possibility of another hidden agenda. A clue of this other hidden agenda came to light when Baxter and Aver Biotechnology were caught sending out 16 shipments of weaponized avian bird flu vaccine for human inoculations. If it weren't for a cautious group of Czechoslovakian scientists, who knows how many millions of people would have been killed by this so-called mistake? And what kind of pandemic would have resulted? If Baxter's plan would have succeeded, you can bet your life the U.S. government would be preparing us for an avian flu pandemic. The government really didn't care what sort of pandemic was launched. They've just been determined for decades to launch a pandemic. As George W. Bush stated on October 4, 2005, "I'm concerned about what an avian flu outbreak could mean for the U.S. and the world." Talk about subtly planting the seed of expectation in the minds of the viewers. Now, I can think of thousands of products that I'd prefer to buy, but guess what our tax money just recently purchased? Whether we want it or not, our generous government just used our tax money to buy 250 million doses of swine flu vaccine. In case you might be thinking that we just as well use up the useless stuff since we already paid for it, I'd like to point out a few reasons why that just isn't a good idea at all. First of all, even though flu vaccines haven't been found to be of any significant benefit, scientific researchers are discovering that all flu vaccines have a very dark and sinister background. In fact, they're now discovering that the flu epidemic of 1918 was nothing more than a horrible result of the first serious mass vaccination campaign. Of the many vaccine campaigns our government has opposed onto us, just one example is the polio vaccine campaign from 1955 to 1963, where most of us who were children at the time were forced to get the polio vaccine. Now scientists are discovering that they were pumping a virus called simian virus 40 into us. This is a virus that was in the monkey kidneys they used to make the vaccine from. Because this virus is sexually transmitted from person to person and passed on from mothers to babies in the womb, one study estimates that 25% of all of us have the virus. That might not mean much until you realize that they are now linking the simian virus 40 to rare and incurable cancers of the brain, lungs, and bones. The real sad thing about this particular very illegal and immoral act that has already killed thousands and destroyed the lives of probably hundreds of thousands more is that Dr. Maurice Hellerman, a prominent vaccine expert and head of Merck's vaccine division, admitted that mass inoculations in the 1950s and 1960s likely caused thousands of annual cancer deaths because their polio vaccines were contaminated with the simian virus 40. According to Hillerman, Merck knew the vaccines were infected with simian virus 40, but distributed them anyhow. Now, before we review the ingredients of the nasty cocktails the pharmaceutical companies have brewed up for us, there's a very important report that has recently surfaced as a result of whistleblowers exposing what our beloved government has done to at least one group of our servicemen. The report states an unnamed U.S. Navy vessel was put to sea in April with a 347-man crew. All 347 were vaccinated with H1N1 swine flu vaccine shortly after they were put to sea. 333 of the 347-man crew got so sick that a total of 50 Navy personnel, which included 16 medical doctors, were sent aboard to respond to the crisis. The captain and the chief petty officer both died. Of the 50 personnel who were sent aboard to assist, 10 of them caught the flu, of which 2 were in serious condition at the time of the reporting. The Navy has threatened all of the spouses of the ship's crew to remain silent, claiming that all this information is classified. Some are whistleblowing, and that is how this information got out. On the aircraft carrier that provided the assistance, 415 sailors contracted the swine flu and were being quarantined on board at the time of the report. It's quite obvious that the laboratory-engineered virus has been cultured to be much more contagious and destructive than the innocent flu virus from a pig that naturally occurs. To expose the reason for this, it's been discovered that when you combine live viruses with squalene as an adjuvant, the virus becomes many times more potent and lethal. We'll discuss more about squalene in a few minutes, but I just wanted to clarify up front the reason the laboratory-engineered virus is so much more contagious and destructive than the naturally occurring swine flu virus the pig farmers sometimes get. According to the immunogeneticist Dr. Hugh Fudenberg, individuals getting 5 consecutive flu shots between 1970 and 1980, which was the time of his study, were 10 times more vulnerable to Alzheimer's disease than others receiving 2 or fewer shots. He didn't comment on the difference between those not getting any shots. He cited dangerous mercury and aluminum ingredients that accumulate in the brain as causing cognitive dysfunction. Flu shots contain 25 micrograms of mercury, and 1 microgram is considered toxic. By age 2, most U.S. children have received around 237 micrograms of mercury through vaccines alone. Vaccines contain the following toxic substances: thimerosal, that's the mercury, aluminum hydroxide, aluminum phosphate, ammonium sulfate, squalene, animal tissues and fluids, including horse blood, rabbit brain, dog kidney, monkey kidney, chick embryo, chicken egg, duck egg, pig blood, pig tissue, calf serum, macerated cancer cells, formaldehyde, formalin, synthetic phenol, extracts from aborted human fetal tissue, MSG, sodium deoxycholate, the antibiotics, neomycin and neomycin sulfate, red disinfectant dye, phenoxyethanol, which is antifreeze, polysorbate 20 and 80, and many other such toxic substances. Dr. Wolfgang Wogarg, chairman of the Health Committee in the German Parliament and European Council, warned about the potential swine flu vaccine safety. He said that Novartis's vaccine contained cancerous animal cells. He said that swine flu is not very different from conventional flu, but the vaccine can have very dangerous side effects. In a minute, I'm going to review some of the important ingredients of the swine flu vaccines. As I do so, I think the agenda that's hidden behind the lies we're all being told will become quite obvious. For the past 17 years, a major part of my life work has been in formulating health products. I've learned that by reading the ingredients of any product, I can clearly see what the formulator wants to accomplish with the product. As I studied the ingredients that are being used in the swine flu vaccines, it was very clear that boosting our immune systems is definitely not its purpose. As you will see as we review the effects of these ingredients, the true goal is a slow and painful depopulation of the planet. I apologize for being the bearer of such horrible news, but I'd rather you understand this information as a warning now, rather than as an explanation later for why you're suffering the results of not being properly informed. The first ingredient that I'd like to discuss is polysorbate 80. This is a great ingredient for men to use externally to stimulate the circulation in their scalp to regrow hair. Unfortunately, when it's used in combination with other materials and injected into the human body, it carries the other ingredients with it across the blood-brain barrier. Therefore, the blood-brain barrier can no longer protect itself from these other dangerous ingredients. The swine flu vaccine contains 4.86 milligrams of polysorbate 80, which is 100 times the amount needed to stabilize the vaccine. To clarify the long-term purpose for putting 100 times the needed amount of polysorbate 80 into the swine flu vaccine, research shows that when rats are injected with polysorbate 80, they grow up to be infertile. Put polysorbate 80 together with sodium deoxychlorate, a mild biological detergent used in the process of developing vaccines, which can also cause permanent damage to the blood-brain barrier, and you can almost be assured of destroying a child's chances of reproducing. Now let's discuss mercury. Look how many years the Dental Association forced dentists to lie to us about the detrimental effects of putting mercury fillings into our mouths. Now the dangers are such common knowledge, everybody is quickly forgetting that there was ever a conflict about it. Yet we're still being lied to about the connection between all the mercury in vaccines and the explosion of Alzheimer's and autism. Because the pharmaceutical companies know how subtle the paralyzing effect of mercury is, as it slowly paralyzes the brain and nervous system, of course they'll continue pumping mercury into every person they can until someone actually stops them. It was the large volume of mercury in the flu vaccines that caused such obvious numbers of neurological disorders, including over 500 cases of Guillain-Barré syndrome immediately following the 1976 swine flu vaccine. When such problems showed up so quickly, as a direct result of the vaccinations, they quickly stopped the vaccinations after only 10 weeks into their campaign. At that time, our tax money was still being used to pay for the damages caused by the pharmaceutical companies, which of course cost millions of dollars. I don't think it's necessary to further discuss the laboratory-engineered viruses, the rotting animal parts, or the cancer cells generally added to these witches' brews, but I do need to review one more ingredient: squalene. When it comes to the B vitamins and certain nutrients, to put these nutrients directly into the tissue or into the bloodstream generally improves utilization of the nutrients many times over. Unfortunately, it works pretty close to the opposite with squalene. The distinctions I'm about to present are vital for you to know about because they show why you can inject a great nutrient such as squalene and, due to the body's response, destroy your health rather than enhancing the benefits touted for this nutrient. Squalene is a natural and vital part of the synthesis of cholesterol, steroid hormones, and vitamin D in the human body. There's a long list of benefits that have been attributed to the use of supplemental squalene, especially from shark liver oil. Some of these benefits are support for the immune system and the body's response to allergies, supporting joint mobility. It helps maintain healthy skin, possesses powerful antioxidant properties, enhances wound healing and minimizes scarring. It increases energy by improving cellular oxygenation, enhances respiratory health, boosts immune defenses for winter colds and flu, reduces fatigue and improves the digestive system. You see, our immune system recognizes squalene as an oil molecule native to our bodies. It's found throughout our nervous system and brain. It isn't necessary to take shark liver oil to consume squalene. Squalene is also found in olive oil. Not only does our immune system recognize it, but our whole body enjoys the many benefits I just reviewed. If injecting squalene would multiply all those benefits, I'd love to get a shot of squalene. But rather than jumping into a field I'm not educated in to learn by trial and error, I'd rather trust the research already performed in that field. And according to a study published in the American Journal of Pathology back in the year 2000, it was demonstrated that a single injection of squalene into rats triggered a chronic immune-mediated joint-specific inflammation. In other words, just after a single injection of squalene, the rats developed rheumatoid arthritis. Now, if you or I had done similar studies, then read of others performing the same studies, and we all concluded that every time you inject squalene into a rat, the rat developed rheumatoid arthritis, what would we conclude? That's right, we would conclude that for some reason, when this substance is injected, it creates a horrible destructive reaction. We would also conclude that until we understood the reason it was so destructive and solved that problem, we wouldn't even consider injecting it into humans. Well, the pharmaceutical companies and the U.S. government obviously don't think the same as you and I. They decided to pump it into the men and women in our armed services, preparing them for the Gulf War. So the difference between good and bad squalene is the route by which it enters your body. Injection is an abnormal route of entry, which incites your immune system to attack all the squalene in your body, not just the vaccine adjuvant. Your immune system will attempt to destroy the molecule wherever it finds it, including the areas it naturally occurs, also in the areas where it's vital to the health of your nervous system. Although the Novartis squalene adjuvant was an unapproved ingredient in experimental anthrax vaccines, the men and women in our armed services were still vaccinated with the experimental anthrax vaccine. The Department of Defense made every attempt to deny that squalene was indeed an added contaminant in the anthrax vaccine administered to Persian Gulf War military personnel, deployed and non-deployed, as well as participants in the more recent anthrax vaccine immunization program. More recently, a test has been developed to detect anti-squalene antibodies in Gulf War syndrome patients. From this test, a clear link was established between the contaminated product and all the Gulf War syndrome sufferers. According to Dr. Vera Scheibner, Ph.D., a retired principal research scientist for the Government of Australia, this adjuvant, meaning squalene, contributed to the cascade of reactions called Gulf War syndrome, documented in the soldiers involved in the Gulf War. So much for the mystery of what actually caused the Gulf War syndrome and what it is exactly. The symptoms they developed included arthritis, fibromyalgia, lymphadenopathy, rashes, photosensitive rashes, malar rashes, chronic fatigue, chronic headaches, abnormal body hair loss, non-healing skin lesions, aphthous ulcers, dizziness, weakness, memory loss, seizures, mood changes, neuropsychiatric problems, antithyroid effects, anemia, elevated ESR, which is erythrocyte sedimentation rate, systemic lupus, multiple sclerosis, ALS, which is amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, Raynaud's phenomenon, Sjögren's syndrome, chronic diarrhea, night sweats, and low-grade fevers. There isn't a greater betrayal than having our young men and women putting their lives on the line protecting the United States while their very own government knowingly injects them with experimental poisons, then lies about it and refuses to accept responsibility for their actions. By now it should be completely clear as to why our politicians were able to predict a swine flu pandemic. It's exactly like the guy who amazed everyone with his accurate predictions of every major fire in their town. Everyone was so amazed with his predictions right up to the time they discovered that he was also the arson who was starting the fires. If Baxter didn't get caught sending out the starter seeds for the avian flu pandemic, by now we would all be preparing for the avian flu pandemic of 2009 rather than the swine flu pandemic of 2009. Now, of course, every time there is even a mild vaccination campaign imposed upon people, there is always much more death and disability created by the vaccinations than the disease would ever have caused. So in the past, millions of dollars have been demanded to be paid out to alleviate some of the suffering caused by these campaigns. Therefore, this year, Ms. Kathleen Sebelius, the Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services, signed documents giving full immunity to manufacturers, doctors, clinics, schools, etc., from any legal action as a result of injury caused by these vaccines. In other words, Obama and his whole team are preparing to wage a one-sided war against you and I, for which they've created a firewall of immunity to protect themselves from the harm they know they're about to inflict upon us. Since modern technology has allowed us so many ways of sharing information so quickly, you and I are now well informed of what is really being planned for our future. It's obvious that we were not involved in the planning stage, but what do you think about taking the information that others have worked so hard to provide for us, and you and I change the outcome of what has been planned for? There are 3 ideas I'd like to propose. First, that we immediately do what is necessary to prepare our bodies to withstand whatever we get exposed to, and I'll be happy to provide you with the guidance in that area. Second, each of us needs to have a plan in place for what to do if we're forced to receive the vaccination, which I've included at the end of this recording. And thirdly, We need to join together and stop these criminal actions once and for all. It's a fact of life that a thief or any other criminal will never stop committing crime until someone stops them. The crimes that are being prepared for enforcement onto us are nothing less than an extension of the crimes imposed upon at least 11 million people in the early 40s by Hitler and the pharmaceutical industry. Anyone interested in doing a little research can find plenty of information that shows the link between the inhumane medical experiments at the Auschwitz concentration camps and the Rockefeller Foundation, which is a major investor in the pharmaceutical industry. When you realize that the Rockefeller Foundation has been funding research on eugenics not only through Auschwitz, but also to our present time, this may clarify why the modern swine flu vaccine has enough squalene to possibly cause inoculated young people to grow up incapable of reproducing. So for the first project, every person needs to be aware of the basic principles needed to be followed in order to prepare their immune system and their body to survive diseases of both man and nature. We've been told all of our lives that viruses are the reason we catch flu. What would you think if I told you that there was a much more universal reason for colds and flu? Dr. R. Edgar Hope Simpson, a British general practitioner and self-educated epidemiologist, that's the medical scientist who figures out why a particular disease begins and spreads within a population. Anyhow, after his celebrated discoveries regarding the cause of shingles and their connection to chickenpox, Hope Simpson dedicated much of the rest of his working life to the study of influenza. Hope Simpson's years of dedicated research isolated a very vital fact for truly understanding the real cause of influenza. That fact is, a predictable flu epidemic follows the radiation patterns of the sun. He found these solar radiation patterns as a much stronger predictor of influenza epidemics than the presence of virus-specific antibodies. He discovered very clearly that the specific times of the year when cloud cover blocks the rays of the sun, which is of course in the wintertime in the northern hemisphere and during the rainy season of the southern hemisphere. No matter how much distance exists between countries, every year influenza epidemics break out at the same time around the world within the same latitude. After years of careful observation and research, Dr. Hope Simpson concluded in 1981 that there was definitely what he termed to be a seasonal stimulus that was responsible for influenza epidemics, totally separate from the state of a person's immunity. Keep in mind that during the 80s, vitamin D deficiency was only considered as a problem associated with the absorption and utilization of calcium and phosphorus, a concern mostly affecting the bone structure of the body. It was only in recent times that the extreme necessity of vitamin D was discovered for the health of our immune systems and for the avoidance of colds and flu. With the great foundation of research laid by Dr. Hope Simpson, it was easy to put the pieces together and clearly see the true cause for colds and influenza, and to see that a virus can only activate a cold or flu in a body deficient of vitamin D, which commonly happens during the time of the year when the body hasn't been exposed to sunshine for many weeks and the diet is lacking a sufficient nutritional source of vitamin D. Before the connection with vitamin D was linked to colds and flu, most people just accepted that unless you have osteoporosis or some other bone disorder, a slight vitamin D deficiency wasn't something to really worry about. Now, moving toward the fall of 2009, there aren't many health concerns more important than overcoming your vitamin D deficiency. What do you think your chances are of being vitamin D deficient? Researchers find that most of us are very deficient and a large percentage seriously deficient. Although there is vitamin D in some foods we eat, there just isn't enough to satisfy our needs. This is why we need to spend more time out in the sun. If we were to spend 20 minutes exposing a large area of our bodies to the sun at least 3 times a week, we could produce enough more vitamin D to satisfy these needs. But that generally doesn't happen. So what else can we do? Okay, now's the time to break out a pen and paper to make your list of what to do. The ideas and suggestions that I'm about to provide is information for your consideration and to discuss with your healthcare professional. This is information that I feel every person should have access to. Number one, because of the time of year and the deficiencies that exist, every adult should be taking from 3,000 to 5,000 international units of vitamin D3 every day right now as a form of treatment. The other major vitamins besides D3 that are needed to boost immunity are, of course, vitamin C, niacin, and B1. All of these are in optimum quantities, as well as all the other vitamins, minerals, and enzymes that are necessary as part of the body chemistry support system. Number two, since every form of unfriendly microorganism thrives in toxic body waste, every person who doesn't know about body chemistry support should find out about it as soon as possible, and those who do know should be providing themselves with body chemistry support, especially during this time. There has never been a more serious need for body chemistry support than now. It's especially important to get your gallbladder flushed out, as well as being absolutely consistent with doing at least 2 detox baths every week. Because there are so many healthcare professionals being forced against their will to receive the swine flu vaccine, and because the rest of us may be forced to do the same thing if we don't stand up and stop it, I want to provide a handful of ideas to protect you from the toxic materials contained within the vaccine. I hope this information doesn't come across as sounding a little paranoid, because I can assure you I have absolutely no problem sitting beside anyone, no matter what sort of disease they might have, with no personal fear. But knowing the contents of the toxic soup they want to pump into us makes me feel the need to be overcautious. I'm presently doing an intensified version of the body chemistry support system, and will be doing a gallbladder flush every week for the next 4 to 6 weeks. I'm also presently taking 5,000 international units of vitamin D every day. If I'm forced to take the swine flu vaccine, these are the steps I plan to take for my own personal protection. Number one, if I have to take the vaccine, I'll do a cleanse similar to the master cleanse beginning a couple days before the vaccination, using homemade lemonade and supported fully with the body chemistry support system. 2, just before the time of receiving the injection, I'll drink 16 ounces of microparticle silver and another 16 ounces immediately after. Number 3, I'll immediately place a prepared bandage of bentonite clay blended with microparticle silver over the injection site to pull as much of the metals and toxic substance out as possible. Number 4, after returning home, I'll be doing a detox bath with extra bentonite clay mixed into the bath, as well as holding a larger mass of clay and silver to the injection site for the 30 minutes of the detox bath. I hope the information I've shared with you saves you and those you care about from unnecessary suffering, and I hope that you agree with me that it's really better to get truly bad news rather than being lied to any longer. There's just one more thought that I'd like to share with you before I conclude, and that is, because of how many of us there are that are standing up and informing others about the detrimental effects of these swine flu shots, it is possible for them to try and make us all look like paranoid fools by putting a placebo of some sort in the injections and postponing this pandemic to another time. I just want to let you know that I would much rather look like a fool than have them follow through with what they have planned. So feel free to duplicate this recording and share it with your family and friends. I believe that if we are successful in avoiding this swine flu vaccination, we need to then intensify our efforts to eliminate the dictatorship that has slithered its way into our government and is so determined to control our lives in the ways they desire.